welcome you watching News 9 Live with me, Neha Khanna, and joining me in the studio is my colleague and our political editor, Vijay Pandey. On the show, we are going to discuss the curious case of Tipu Sultan's sword. What are we talking about? The iconic bedchamber sword of Tipu Sultan was auctioned in London on Tuesday for a whopping 145 crore rupees. Tipu Sultan was, of course, an 18th century ruler famous for the commanding role he played in wars in southern India. And here's an interesting fact that has got people talking. This is apparently the same sword that was once owned by fugitive Indian tycoon Vijay Mallya. And here it gets more intriguing. During a hearing of the loan default case at the London High Court in 2018, Mallya's lawyer had claimed that the whereabouts of this sword were not known. What's more, Mallya had even claimed that this priceless artifact had brought him bad luck, and so he had given it away. Speaking to News9 Plus, researcher and historian Nitin Olikar said this is the very same sword that Vijay Mallya had bought in 2004. The price at which the sword was acquired by Mallya was 1.5 crore. On Tuesday, the same sword was auctioned for a staggering 145 crore rupees. Remember, the former liquor baron owes Indian banks 9,000 crore. In 2016, a consortium of 13 Indian banks had tried to convince the London High Court against reversing an order to freeze Mallya's global assets. Later that year, Mallya claimed that he'd given away the sword as it had brought his family bad luck. News9 contacted the UK-based auction house Bonhams to find out about the previous owners of this sword. The group refused to comment, saying we are not authorized to disclose the identity of our sellers and buyers as it's against our privacy policy. Now, Tipu's sword bought by Vijay Mallya and the one auctioned on Tuesday have the same inscriptions. The sword was presented to Major General Bard and it had Shamsher-e Malik, or the sword of the ruler, inscribed on it. Also seen on the auctioned Tipu sword. The sword was looted from Tipu Sultan's palace by the troops of the East India Company after the fall of Seringapatnam, in which the Tiger of Mysore, as Tipu Sultan is known, was killed in battle. Since then, the sword had changed hands multiple times before it reached fugitive tycoon Vijay Mallya in 2004. The question is, did Vijay Mallya lie earlier about giving away the Tipu Sultan sword? Is he the one who's auctioned the sword at the sky-high price of 145 crore after having bought it for a mere 1.5 crore? Is it this fugitive who has pocketed this huge profit from the auction proceeds of the priceless artifact and profited from this piece of Indian history? Why is this important? As we mentioned, Vijay Mallya owes Indian banks and taxpayers 9,000 crore. So just what is this curious case of Tipu's sword? All right. I, of course, have my colleague Vijay Pandey with me in the studio. Also joining us on the show, the historian I just mentioned, Nitin Olikar, joining us from Shivamogga in Karnataka. My colleague Vajayullah will also be joining us from Bengaluru. In fact, he's with us already. Nitin Olikar, let me start with you since I quoted you at the top of the show. First and foremost, if you could explain to our viewers the historical significance of this sword and why you believe the sword that's been auctioned in London for 145 crore is the same sword that Vijay Mallya had bought in 2004, which he later claimed that he had given away.
Well, because I've been following auction houses since 25 years, and the sale, the 2003 sale at DNW was also a very talked about sale, even in the media back then. And the kind of inscriptions, and the photos were shared even then in newspapers then, as well as the internet then. And the inscriptions that we saw on the sword there, and the bedchamber sword. See, there cannot be two swords that David Baird took, and this is the same sword, because inscription-wise on the hilt, and as well as the shape of the sword and its relation to David Baird and the Dix-Nunn Webb auction then. So this has to be the same sword, and this is the same sword.
And so also, if you could explain to our viewers the historical significance of this sword. Correct me if I'm wrong, it was looted by the troops of the East India Company soon after Tipu Sultan was killed in battle.
That's right. So this sword is extremely important. See, there are several swords of Tipu Sultan, all very expensive, but most of them in the royal collection in England, in the Queen's collection, now the King's collection, King Charles collection. There are a few at Powys Castle where Lady Henrietta Clive, that was Lord Clive's daughter-in-law, took with her. There are some in the Army Museum there. But this sword is essentially important because this is considered the sword of state. That's what it says, Shamshir al-Mulk. Mulk or Malik can be read in two ways, or the sword of the state or the sword of the ruler. And this was found in his bed chamber. You know the Mughals, right from the Mughal time. So Akbar had would keep a sword, a different sword with him every night. We do not know if Tipu followed this custom, but we know that this particular sword was found by his bedside. And so this has a very important significance, a personal significance to Tipu. It's a very beautiful piece. And the relation to David Baird, because Baird was prisoner for 4 years, the Pollilur, at the Battle of Pollilur in the Second Anglo-Mysore War, where England suffered its biggest defeat in colonial history ever. There was no defeat before that and no such defeat after that, where an entire, the 73rd Highlanders, where Scotsman, where David Baird was literally wiped out to the last man, and several of them were taken prisoner. So David Baird came back, and 1792 he was there in the Third Anglo-Mysore War, and finally in 1799 where he led a section of the army, and this sword was presented to him. So it has a significance of saying where all the power and glory of Tipu now goes to the British. So this sword is important. It also has a significance in that.
Clearly, the historical significance of the sword cannot be overstated because as far as I know, no other Indian artifact has ever gone for a price similar to this, 145 crore at an auction. Vajiola, let me come to you. Not that I'm not interested in history, but the point that interests me and I'm pretty sure scores of other Indians is this. Did Vijay Mallya lie when he claimed that he had given away the sword of Tipu Sultan because it had brought him and his family bad luck? This is the claim that he made in 2018. Soon after, there was an order from the London High Court saying that all his global assets should be frozen. Is it possible that it is actually Vijay Mallya who has profited from this auction and made 145 crore for a piece of history for which he had paid a measly 1.5 crore?
Well, now you have to remember that this sword has resurrected after 20 years. I think 2004 was the last when public saw this sword, and after that, nobody had an idea where the sword went. It was only after the entire Kingfisher case came out, Vijay Mallya ran away. That is when his assets were started counting, and that is when the mention of the sword first happened in 2016. Nigel Tossey, the lawyer for the 13 bank consortium, he also mentioned in the court, in the UK court, he first mentioned saying that the court should immediately put a freeze on all the assets because Vijay Mallya is despairing them. So that was the first time we heard of it. After that, in another quote, he mentioned that Vijay Mallya is known to keep selling. He said even the details of these swords have not been mentioned properly. He has said that he has sold this sword to somebody. He's given it off to somebody because his family believes it has brought him bad luck. But he has not given them the details of the person to whom he sold it to. Where has the sword gone? If he has given it to somebody, there was no sale deed. Nothing of that sort was presented by Vijay Mallya or Vijay Mallya's lawyer. And it was not just the sword, there was another car also which was mentioned along with the sword when the lawyer mentioned it in the court. But the sword is the one that we're talking about. So even in 2016, the Indians didn't have a clue where the sword went. The only answer we had was Vijay Mallya gave it to somebody because he believed this brought bad luck to his family. Now, after 2016, today is 2023, and after a gap of 7 years, we have seen the sword. We've seen this word after 20 years. We've got to hear the mention of this word after 7 years again now. Now, in these 7 years, how many hands did these sword move, or it was hidden by Vijay Mallya, and keeping in mind that all his assets have been frozen to get some financial gain, he might have now sold it. Now, all these things are speculations. We are still trying to get to the bottom of it. But yes, he has already confessed in court that he's given it somebody without informing the court that who is the person who he sold it to. So there are all possibility that he could have sold it or he could not have sold it. But yes, the sword after 20 years has resurrected again, and it has again become a controversy. Tipu otherwise is a controversy in this country.
Exactly. Tipu Sultan over the years has been controversial, especially in Karnataka politics for multiple reasons. But now you have the Tipu Sultan sword making headlines all over again. Brijesh, let me come to you. Why are we talking about what an individual may or may not have owned? Why are we talking about an auction? This is not something we routinely debate on a show. The reason that we are talking about this, the reason why it is important is very simple. The man who once acquired this sword owes Indian banks and taxpayers 9,000 crore rupees. And now we are told that this sword has been auctioned for 145 crore. We don't know who the seller is. We don't know who the buyer is. Do you not believe that this is something that needs to be investigated by the government of India?
Well, absolutely, and I guess it will be investigated either by the government of India or one of these, publications would definitely want to investigate and try to find out, what exactly, who exactly is the buyer. I mean, the auctioneering house will definitely want to keep the identity a secret, as their want is. But the fact of the matter is that, it looks like that, the sword which was considered unlucky, it still was with Vijay Mallya, that it has proved extraordinarily lucky. Imagine from 1.5 crores to 145 crores. It's a massive jump. And chances of Vijay Mallya himself profiting from this auction is also very high, because 1.5 crore sword, how much price would you have gotten back at that point of time? And there's no clear-cut sequence of events which shows that he has actually lost the sword. He says it brings bad luck. We are yet to know whether the sword brings the bad luck or series of bad decisions taken by him. One day he finally decided to left the country, never to come back. So I think a lot needs to be investigated, and I guess people will be questioning, or people will try to find out exactly who is the seller of this sword, because if it is Vijay Mallya, then the government of India, those banks who are already locked in a litigation with Vijay Mallya in London, they would definitely want to move the court and would want those 145 crore rupees minus the money which the auctioning house takes to be confiscated, to be kept in the account to be free, so that they can get their cut before it goes to Vijay Mallya's kitty.
I couldn't agree more with you. Questions are bound to be asked. This man claims that he had just given away the sword. Fact of the matter is, as Vajee pointed out, that there was no sale deed at the time, no details provided by Vijay Mallya about who he gave away the sword to, who he might have sold it to, and at what price. Even though at this moment it is not clear at all what may have happened to the sword between 2004 and now, when the auction has taken place. But we are talking about a whopping sum of 145 crore. And if this money has indeed gone to the kitty of this fugitive called Vijay Mallya, who owns you and me, the Indian taxpayers, 9,000 crore, then not only will questions be asked, there needs to be a thorough investigation. But Nitin Olikar, let me come back to you, sir, at this point. If you could just take us back to 2004, when Vijay Mallya bought this sword, acquired it for 1.5 crore. Of course, auctions of artifacts is nothing new or unusual. A rich man buying a piece of history, as it were, is nothing unusual. But, Tipu Sultan is a very sensitive subject in the state of Karnataka. So if you could just take our viewers back to 2004 and tell us about what happened at the time when Vijay Mallya acquired this sword.
Well, I
What kind
think
of
that
reactions were there?
there is also a circumstance, behind that. So this was a time when Vijay Mallya was also dabbling in politics, and he was part of the Janata Dal United president then. And it was important for him to be a symbol of Kannadiga pride and Karnataka's pride. And that, in my opinion, was also, and he himself stated it when he got the sword back. And so we have media reports of him, and you have this photo up of him showing the sword somewhere in Ajmer, if my memory serves right, and specifically says that Karnataka and the Kannadiga people have claimed back its rightful heritage. So there was a lot of pride and there was a lot of happiness among everybody, especially in Karnataka, that a piece of history had come back. And there was also some questions asked of why it was not kept here when we heard that later it had been taken back by him to England or someplace or America, if I was not wrong, for a while. But that did make a lot of news then.
All right. It's incredible from claiming that he had, in a sense, bought a piece of, Karnataka's history, and this was a symbol of Kannadiga pride, to then claiming many years later that this sword had actually brought him and his family bad luck and that he had given it away. While, there is really no clarity on whether Vijay Mallya was speaking the truth or whether he may have completely lied, given that, by now he was a fugitive, one of the most wanted men in India. But Mr. Olikar, if we were to just generally look at the history of such artifacts being auctioned, let me ask you, what explains the interest in the sword of Tipu Sultan, the fact that somebody would want to pay as much as 145 crore for it? We don't know who the buyer is, but somebody's coughed up that much money. And, my research tells me that never before has an Indian artifact or an Islamic artifact, for that matter, been sold for as much as 145 crore. What do you think explains this level of interest, that somebody would want to make such a huge investment?
Yes, if my memory serves me right, and I've been informed that no Indian artifact has ever gone for more than 5 million pounds, and this hit 14 million pounds, almost 3 times that. So Tipu Sultan is an amazing figure in Indian history. So whatever be the controversies, and controversies are not new to Tipu, they were there even when he was around, and later fueled by the British and so many other things down to this particular day where you have politics fueling it. So he's an amazing guy who probably Mysore in his time was the first, I would say, pre-modern state. It was a brilliant example of what Bertenstein calls maybe a military fiscal state. And it was well noted by the British. So why do the British, or why do Europe, even France, I mean, Tipu mania hit France also, even in America. So now there's a lot of research being done. Amin Ahmed has done quite some research on Tipu mania in America, and the American revolutionaries looked at Tipu and spoke about Tipu, wrote about Tipu when they were fighting the English. So Tipu, in terms of fiscal prudence, in terms of his military prowess, and also his amazing way of, using revenue generated from Mysore to fuel trade, to fuel industries, and also the war machine, was very much noted by the English. And he was probably the only Indian ruler who realized that the British were here not for trade and not just to support one Indian power against the other, but he realized very well, and he was probably the only one, along with his father, the only one, I repeat again, who realized that the British were here to eat up this country, which they did. So he was probably the only Indian ruler who the British actually beat in battle, and they were very proud of it. So the other ones were all bought off or betrayed by their own companions and adjusted wise, and this was a real battle. And so it was very important for the English, and that's why they also, while they damaged Tipu's memory in several ways, they also glorified him in different ways. So Tipu is very important in both European colonial history as well as in world history.
Very interesting. It's not just Indian history. He's a very important figure even in European colonial history. And it's interesting how you describe this as Tipu mania, which is being witnessed even in the United States. Brijesh Pandey, Tipu mania. Mr. Olikar is calling it. If you had 145 crore rupees to spare, would you invest in the sword of Tipu Sultan? And also, is this auction reason enough for the Indian government to double down on its efforts to get
the only thing
Vijay Mallya extradited?
which I can say for sure is if I have 145 crores, I won't be sitting here. So besides that, see, the fact is that yes, I completely agree with the gentleman, before me. I completely agree with him. When this sword was brought by Vijay Mallya, and it was bought, and it created a great degree of furor. And people loved just the fact that that the sword has been brought by an Indian. It is brought back to the place Karnataka where the sword actually belonged, and it was a massive
matter of great pride.
Matter of great pride. So I mean, later on politics turned, and then you have your own various sets of history as to whichever sect you want to believe that like this history is right or that history is right. But at that point of time, it was matter of great pride, and he was virtually literally eulogized for getting that sword back to India. Now, what bad luck that sword caused to Vijay Mallya is something which has not been documented. So we don't know for sure, where does this theory of, or where does this line of...
I think bad luck comes when you run away with Indian taxpayers' money.
It's that as well, and I think it has not been documented why this sword has caused bad luck. I guess Vijay Mallya is an astute businessman. He realized that not now but later this sword can fetch you good fortune. As I completely agree with him, this sword is a great piece of history to be owned with, and this is the reason why it has fetched you this much of price. And later on the situation may have changed. You may like Tipu Sultan, you may not like Tipu Sultan, but history doesn't change. And it was a pride of place, and he was eulogized, feted as a hero. Vijay Mallya was, for getting that sword back to India.
Yes.
So I think chances of Vijay Mallya having that sword and somebody else doing the entire deal on his behalf could also be very high, because there is no documented proof of both the things. A, how did it brought bad luck to Vijay Mallya, and B, whether Vijay Mallya actually lost the sword or not.
Absolutely. Did Vijay Mallya fall on the sword of Tipu Sultan as he would have us believe? Very quickly, Brijesh, do you think this is an issue that could irk the Indian government enough for it to double down on its efforts to pursue the man's extradition? This is a case that has gone on and on in UK courts, and let's face it, we're nowhere closer to having him extradited to India. And yes, these are very, very complex cases.
Well, the Indian government is already trying, so there's no way they can expedite his, being brought back to India on the basis of this claim. But this would have definitely caught the eyes and interest of Indian agencies who are investigating and trying to figure out, the entire labyrinthine mazework of how the money has been operated and how the money has been swindled out of the country. Yeah. So I guess Indian investigative agency would be looking very, very closely about this particular deal. They will also, would want to find out who is the actual seller of this sword, and whether there is any merit or truth in the fact that Vijay Mallya has actually lost the sword. So I think they will be very closely looking at the entire deal.
Well, when you're talking about a sum as big as 145 crores, certainly the matter needs to be investigated, since the individual we're talking about, as I keep saying, owes the Indian taxpayers and banks 9,000 crore. Last question to you, Vajiullah. Imagine at one point, for Vijay Mallya, the sword was a symbol of Karnataka pride. He took a lot of credit for bringing this sword back to India, and then a few years later, once he was declared a fugitive from Indian law, he said the sword had brought him bad luck. Have there been any political reactions yet in Karnataka to this auction?
Well, so far we haven't heard anything from the political circles, but the whole point where Vijay Mallya says that it had brought him bad luck. Well, there are interviews before 2016 where he mentions about this sword, and he proudly speaks about it. The whole idea, I think, when you are pushed to shove, that is when you come up with excuses, and this is the statement that he, I think, had given in court, where he said that the reason why he gave it away because it brought him bad luck. So when you are trying to save face from a lot of allegations, when you're trying to save assets, there are these lies you say, and it's not just the sword with Vijay Mallya. A lot of other property, a lot of other assets, his entire England bungalow, all these things are under question as of now because for most of it, he's claimed that he's not the direct owner for this, though he resides at those places, though he has shares over there. So Vijay Mallya is a very tricky character. He played the sword for his benefit when he bought it in 2003. It was a huge event. I was a 13-year-old kid and I watched it on TV, and I remember how proud moment it was for the state when they saw that sword in their hand in the state. But after that, this journey that the sword took and the journey that Vijay Mallya took were two different things. And how you try to save that sword is something you learn from Vijay Mallya, where you say that it wasn't with me, I gave it to somebody, but then the sword ends up at 145 crores. I think it's a good deal that he had, or he may have had. But it now remains to be seen, as Mr. Vijay said, that investigation is needed. The MEA should actually get into it and find out, because these are assets that are very important for India. It could be one of our own thing, like the Kohinoor that we wanted to have it back. So I think Indian government should look into it and make sure that it comes back. So far, there are no political reactions from the state. We are yet to hear from the leaders, especially Kumaraswamy, the JDS, because he was the one who was there with him during that day when the sword was here. So it's a wait and watch situation on how the politics of the state sees this in the coming days.
Okay. Nithin Olikar, let me give you the last word. It's interesting, Vaji just drew a comparison between the Kohinoor and the Tipu Sultan sword. On a lighter note, do you think, sir, that this is a perfect opportunity and time for the Indian government to bring the Tipu Sultan sword once again back to India, saying this belongs to us because this was acquired by a man who owes India a lot of money?
Certainly. And before I answer that quickly about the bad luck part, the Queen of England, the then Queen, the then King of England in 1799 acquired everything from the throne of Tipu Sultan, or parts of the broken throne, to swords, to his clothes, to his armor. And I see no bad luck to the Royal House of Windsor. They are very lucky. In the past 10 years, the Sheikh of Qatar, where the Museum of Islamic Art in Doha has accumulated an excellent series of Tipu artifacts. They've been buying, and petroleum prices are rising. They've made their profits. So this is very surprising that, it's bringing bad luck to, 145 crores from 1.5 crores is the best ROI that
you can hardly call it bad luck.
Can ever get in. So yes, I think the Indian government has a great opportunity now, probably a legal lacuna that they can find, and they can bring this. It's an excellent piece. This is his bedchamber sword. It's not one of the many swords that he owned. This would have been extremely dear to him. So it's a great opportunity. We should get it back if we have a way.
Absolutely. Best possible ROI that you can have on an artifact, a great opportunity for India to bring back home the famous and iconic sword of Tipu Sultan. But the million-dollar question still remains. Did Vijay Mallya, the fugitive from Indian law, lie about giving away the sword? Is he the man who's made this 145 crore in profit from the auction proceeds? And if that is indeed the case, then should the Indian government, have the matter at the very least investigated? Well, that's all the time we have on the show. Thank you to our guests for joining us, and thanks to the viewers for watching.